Hi, and welcome to another edition of Seniors Today. I'm your host, Tom Bartee, and our guest today is Mr. Jeff Trager, who is a legend in his own mind from the Bay Area music scene. How you doing, Jeff?
Fine, fine.
I think maybe the legend in other minds as well would be appropriate, but I'm glad you're here today.
Thank you. Yeah.
I know you've been on the show before, and you have such a wealth of knowledge of some of the things that happened in the early days in the music scene in the Bay Area that we wanted to recapture some of that today if we could.
Sure.
And you know, it's been a while since you were on the show, and you know how memories go. So I can't remember exactly where we stopped, but I know that that you started in the Bay Area music scene in the record industry around 1967.
Correct.
And how did that all come about?
It was, I was working as a bellboy going to college. I was working at the Jack Tar Hotel, and just so happened I met George Moscone and the Burton boys. They used to get their haircuts there, and I would take George down to some clubs in San Francisco, a jazz club, and saw Stan Getz, saw Ike and Tina Turner, and then he was driving me home, and he says, you know, you love music, I want to try to get you a job, a real job in the music business, because I think you really know what you're talking about, and you love music. And I says, I have a friend named Herb Alpert.
Wow.
And so he set it up, an appointment, and I was hired by the Alpert organization, A&M Records, and that's how I got in the record business.
Wow. And that was when he was doing the Pt1 Brass and all the other...
Baja Marimba Band, and he just signed the Brazil 66, Sergio Mendez's band.
Yeah. And that was 67?
67. It was kind of ironic that I used to go see Sergio Mendez in his first band that came to the United States called Brazil 65 before he got signed. And I'd go to the Matador on Broadway Street, and I'd go there, and then I'd go over to the Trident in Sausalito and see him. And he had this incredible band, this group of great Brazilian musicians. He had a woman named Wanda de Sá who sang. She was 22 years old. She was like one of the great Brazilian singers of her time, and a guitar player named Rosalia de Valencia. She was legendary guitarist, and Oscar Castro Neves. I mean, he brought in the best musicians from Brazil, and here I get a job with A&M Records. And who's on the label is Herb Alpert and the Pt1 Brass, the Baja Marimba Band, Sergio Mendez in Brazil 66, Antonio Carlos Jobim, Wes Montgomery. These are all artists that I absolutely loved, and you know, and here I am in the record business.
So what were you doing for them at that time?
I was doing radio promotion.
Okay.
I was doing radio. I was going around to radio stations and promoting their music. It was really tough to do. You know, walk in with a Herb Alpert record. It's, you know, I mean, everything he touched in those days, it was gold. He was one of the biggest selling artists at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd get to go see his shows because I was his promotion guy, and I'd get to go see Nancy Wilson, one of my favorites, opening up at the Civic Auditorium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she has a great voice.
Yeah, and so she opened for Herb, and so I was amazed. You know, I was getting paid to do this. I was getting paid to go to the Fillmore Auditorium with my groups.
What was your group?
Oh, I had a lot of groups that came through because I worked for a distributor, and we had a lot of labels besides A&M. So we had Blue Thumb Records, who I eventually went to work for, We had ABC Dunhill, which was the Mamas and the Papas, and Steppenwolf, and we had Impulse Records, which was one of the finest jazz labels that I've ever, been associated with, and so I was involved with a lot of labels. So a lot of great artists would come through San Francisco, and on the weekends sometimes I had the Rolling Stones coming into town maybe 2 months after I started in the business, and then the Moody Blues came into town, and then all the great breaking British bands would come through San Francisco, and I'd go to the Fillmore and get to watch them for nothing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd have 40, 50 tickets because the labels would all want to bring radio people. So I'd always have 40 or 50. I always gave them to my friends, and so we'd go to the Fillmore, and we get to see acts like Donovan, and they'd be dandelions coming down from the ceiling, and Jimi Hendrix and the Doors, and you name it, and we sit anywhere we want, and we would go back. I could go backstage. That was unbelievable.
Wow.
I'm just got in the record businesses.
So was there a physical building where they would rehearse, or they would do soundtracks when they were in town, or where your office was?
No. Bill Graham had the Fillmore West, and it was called the Carousel Ballroom, and actually it was right down the hill from where I lived in it, and I just rolled down the hill. But that's where they would do their sound checks,
Is that still there today?
No, it's a car dealership, and I don't think the Winterland is there anymore either. But I would go between Winterland and the Carousel Ballroom, or the Fillmore West. Fillmore West was still on Fillmore Street, but at one time it was the Carousel Ballroom, where all the great big bands used to play there, Dorsey and people like that, and Harry James, and so those were the venues that I covered among the smaller clubs in San Francisco. I went to the Matador a lot.
Would the ballroom be where also the NBC orchestra or band would play? You remember them?
No.
Because there were people in Vallejo that were part of that.
Oh, really?
Like Frank Aristuto.
Oh, yeah.
Babe Pilata. I
Sure.
think he was involved. Some of those guys from a long time ago.
No, Graham locked up everything that he could, and then of course he moved and he spread out, and Bill Graham Presents became a brand, and he was by far, to me, the best entrepreneur, best promoter that I ever worked for. He was tough. I used to play softball with him, and he'd ask me who should be on his day on the green. So I told him, I've got 3 bands that you should put on there: Def Leppard, the Scorpions, and a guy named Pat Travers. And he says, who's Pat Travers? And I says, he's the hottest act in San Jose now. I says, that'll give you San Jose. And he goes, okay,
Yeah.
50,000 people.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it was always good to be on his good side, because there was a time when we had a beef, and he wouldn't let me into any of his venues for about a year, and I needed to be there because I had all my acts there.
What caused the beef?
I did a fundraiser on a Monday night. He did one on Sunday. The night before, he had Elton John as a headliner, and I had the opening act. It was a group called Mark Allman. They used to play with John Mayall. And I had a friend in jail in Spain, and I threw a fundraiser on the next night. And I told Bill, I says, I'm not going to announce who my headliner is, which is Mark Allman. Okay, out of respect to him. Well, the word got out through radio. The guys on the radio, they figured out who it was, and Bill called me the next day at work.
And he was mad.
Mad. Well, Graham put a new meaning on the word mad. He was insanely mad, and he was yelling at me and calling me all these names. And you know, I said, listen, man, I gave him this line. I says, you're not even from here. And then he's called me this, and I says, well, look, this is just going to matter who's going to hang out first. And I had all these people in the office jumping up and down and going, tell him off, tell him off. Because he was sort of a bit larger than life.
Yeah. Well, do you think you actually took people away from his gig?
No. But he didn't get as many people as he thought he was going to get. He got Elton John in when Elton was real early in his career, and he did 4,000. The next night I did 3,500.
Wow.
On a Monday night.
Yeah.
Because I'm from San Francisco. I knew a lot of people, and I knew all the radio people that helped me fill that place.
How long? What year was this?
That was 1971.
So you'd been doing it for 4 years, and so you'd built up your network of contacts, all the radio stations and that kind of thing.
Well, I knew the radio stations were, the guys and gals were my friends. They were the ones who played my music, and I'd go because I was such a music nut that I'd show up sometimes at 2, 3 in the morning and sit and listen, talk music with the disc jockeys.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of guys those are the kind of people that I associated with on a business level. Mm-hmm. And I take them to 49er games because I'd always get a lot of tickets, and that's the way you did it. I played golf with the program director from KDIA and KSOL. You get to become if you wanted their trust, and so to getting records on the air was that was it. You had to have that. So, but it was easy for me. I don't know. I brought him donuts in the morning and whatever it took.
So, did you ever represent any groups, or did you always?
Oh yeah. I represented the groups that the labels would have. Like I said, with London Records, we had the Rolling Stones, and we had Them, which was Van Morrison's first band before he went solo. And we had groups like the Moody's and Savoy Brown, and then Ike and Tina Turner, and I just happened to break their first record because I thought it was a record that belonged on radio, and radio fought me because they told me the record was too black, and I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. I says, I was in here last week with a James Brown record. They said, well, it's really raunchy. I said, yeah, okay, fine. But once I got the record on the radio on KFRC, which was a pop station, and crossed it over, that gave them a whole new audience. See, and they had never been played on a pop station before. So from that record going on KFRC, it got them the Rolling Stones' next tour with B.B. King. And then they got signed by United Artists for a lot of money. And then she went on to do Proud Mary. And then she went on to do I Want to Take You Higher. But they made a lot of money. And Tina never forgot that. I also got her a show with Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin, and they opened up for her. And afterwards I went backstage, and she says, come in my room. She's in a little dressing room like this, and she's sweating like crazy because she just, that's Tina. Tina was the ultimate, she was the female James Brown. And she said, she says to me, thank you for breaking that record, because it was I've Been Loving You Too Long that was written by Otis Redding. And that was their first hit. And she says, 2 years ago, we were playing bowling alleys. And I said, wow, that's pretty cool. So she went on. After she left Ike, nobody would sign her. And a friend of mine was running the A&R department at Capitol Records, a guy named John Carter. And she walked in with her attorney, and he says, I love you. I think the first time I heard that, I've been loving you too long. He says, I've got some songs for you. Happened to be Private Dancer and What's Love Got to Do with Her? What's Love Got to Do with It?
Yeah, wow.
And she went on to be every bit as big as Whitney Houston, you know. And you know, Whitney never wrote any songs. I mean, Tina wrote a few songs, but Tina danced.
She was a performer.
She was the ultimate performer.
Yeah, and even when she was, I don't know how old she is now, but when she was in her 60s, she would still look like she was 40.
Yeah, she was always, well, because she was always in great shape.
Yeah.
And she was raising 4 kids in the same time when all that chaos with Ike was going on. And she was a real sweetheart. I mean, she was a real fine lady, you know. And for her to, it meant a lot to me because I think breaking that record changed her whole life, their whole life, you know. That's what breaking a record does, is it changes everything. The ball game it's a new ball game now.
Well, I did a record when I was in junior high. It didn't change anything.
Well, if you get a record on the radio.
Yeah, I know, I'm just kidding.
Okay, but that's what it is. And there's so many records that come out every week. But if you don't get heard, it's really tough to have a hit record.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, my family moved to Minnesota, and the guy across the street was a salesman and a promoter for Musicland. Yeah. And he always had 45 samples. Yeah. And, you know, he would give them to me for free, and I'd play them. And I remember in 1969 or 70, getting a T-Rex, and you know, just stuff like that before any of those guys were actually really popular. But
it's I told you the story about going down to my father's school. He was a school principal, started in Vallejo. Yeah. But he had a school called Bessie Carmichael in South of Market, and I pulled up in my Cadillac, and I had all these 45s in the trunk, and all the kids would run, break ranks, and run over to Mr. Trager's kid. And then I got home that night, and he says, "Don't ever do that again." You know, he never knew what I did. I'm almost positive that he never really realized what I did for a living. But the fact that I had a career, and he wasn't impressed by a lot of people. So, but you know, I'd bring the guy home from the keyboard player from the Moody Blues. He couldn't care less. He just didn't make any difference.
Yeah, I love that. I used to love that band.
Yeah. They
were pretty awesome.
Yeah. I was fortunate to realize that they had a single called Nights in White Satin. Yeah. On the album is called Days of Future Past. And the record company, all the guys in New York, the big shots, they didn't think it was a hit. They just didn't. You know, record business is run by a lot of attorneys, and when it comes to, you know, the music people, yes, there was many of them, but the guys at the top, really, a lot of them were, you know, they were
pencil pushers.
Pencil pushers.
Yeah.
So they said, nah, that's not a hit record. And I said, yes, it is. I said, that album's selling like crazy. I said, you get this on the radio station, get it on top 40 radio. You imagine how many records you can sell? And when I left the label to go to work for Blue Thumb Records, they did. I said, do me a favor, work this record, because you'll find out that's a hit record. It's different.
Yeah, well, they had a combination of orchestral music and
yeah.
rock.
Yeah,
which was pretty cool.
And because it was different, that's why they kind of, they didn't want to take chances.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So we were talking a little before about Santana, and you know, I don't know where we are in the chronology when you went to this new record label.
Well,
we're probably in like early 70s somewhere.
No, it was in the late 60s. I think it was about 67 when I first got in the business, and I was hanging around with the guys from Santana. Carlos, I knew Carlos because he lived with a friend of mine, and he actually became Santana's manager. But I knew Michael Carabello, and I knew David Brown from the Hunters Point. David Brown and I used to play basketball. He was their bass player.
Yeah.
And so I heard about...
Who was their drummer at that?
Michael Shreves from the Peninsula. And I had heard about this band, then I went and saw them practice, and I said, look at this. I said, what a mixture. I said, not only was the music, you know, it was Afro, it was Latin, it was rock, it was jazz, because Greg Raleigh was a jazz keyboardist, and Michael Shreves was a jazz drummer. And yet here you had probably one of the first integrated bands that really made it. Sly was the other. Sly took it another direction where he had women, an Italian drummer, he had a Mexican saxophone player, Jerry Martini, but he had his sisters, you know, and of course luckily he had Larry Graham on bass, who was a great bass player.
Well, he's from Vallejo too, right?
Sly?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And Sly was a true genius, true musical genius. He was a great producer that people probably don't know about it. He produced Bobby Freeman, The Swim, and he produced Laugh Laugh, that the Beau Brummels had a big hit. They were the American Beatles. And Sly just was one of those guys that was a great writer, great performer. He was a great showman. He just had his demons.
Yeah, and he still does.
Well, yeah, right. A lot of us did.
Then when did Santana incorporate the congas into their?
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
Beginning, yeah.
And who did that? Was it the same guy?
It was Michael Carabello, and it was Chipito Reyes. And Chipito was probably the best musician in the band. He played the congas, he played the timbales. He was a crazy. They were all crazy. But the thing was about that band is that they were different, and the guys liked them, and the women just liked them, and they had a sound that was very sensual. And when you walked into the Carousel Ballroom, you'd hear, they'd always start off with the Miles Davis track called "In a Silent Way."
I remember in my dorm room in college, you could walk up through the halls of the dorm, and you'd hear almost every room playing the Abraxas album, filling the hallways with music. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, but that wasn't the first album. The first one was with Evil Ways, and I'm trying to think what others, but that's where they broke. And Graham was responsible, because Graham put them on Woodstock. They asked him to be a consultant. He says, only if you let this band out of San Francisco play on the stage.
Wow.
And Michael Shreves did that drum solo, and that broke the band, because nobody had ever, I mean, I'm sure that there was music like that in the East Coast, you know, with percussion and with other musicians playing that kind of stuff, you know. But there was never anything like that they had seen, that, you know, that was such a variety.
Yeah, it was a fusion.
Yeah,
of
and
different
Carlos
genres.
was, you know, right up in front. He was a good guitar player. He wasn't great. The other musicians were actually better musicians, but they took a song called, oh God, what was it? I forget the name of the song, but they took that song and they turned that place around upside down. They flew in on a helicopter, came in, jumped on stage, and played Soul Sacrifice. That was the song. And Michael Shreve did a 7 or 8 minute drum solo, and Bill said that was it.
So you mentioned Steppenwolf earlier. What did you do with them? Anything?
Well, yeah, Steppenwolf was on ABC Dunhill, and we also had Mamas and the Papas. And they came to San Francisco and played. Was it the Pushermen and Born to Be Wild and
Yeah. That was all pretty cool back then.
Yeah, you get to go. There was clubs in San Francisco. There was one called the Matrix that only held about 70 or 80 people, and you can go in there and see the Grateful Dead. You could see Janis, and you could see the Doors when they had an off night. And
So did you have anything to do with any of the clubs in Oakland? Because I know there were clubs over there too.
no, most of my stuff was done in San Francisco. I'd go to the Kaiser Auditorium when I'd have Jane Brown in town, and that was interesting.
Well, I hear stories about others that live still in Vallejo today, talking about one guy here in town, you see a bouncer at one of the clubs, and you know, all the different people that would come and go. But you know, we need to do another show because we're out of time, if you could believe it.
Already?
Thanks for being here, but we'll do another show, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and maybe some more current stuff.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for being here.
All right.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Our show airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. on Comcast Channel 27, AT&T UVerse 99, and streaming live video at vcat.tv. Come see us again next time.